So do you know what love is? I can't help but think that the music over all the decades, way before the 80s, and then the classic 80s, and then all that pathetic music in the, 21st century, like Taylor Swift or whatnot. Anyway, they're always asking the question, about love, right? And what I love about the Foreigner song is rather than trying to give a definition of love, they're just asking the question. I want to know what love is. As we gather together as the Church of Christ, Jesus gives us an answer about love. He not only talks about it, but he shows it as well. The central place of where Christians gather, we can have a bunch of differences of opinion about so many things, but the central place we gather in our faith is when we come to the Lord's Supper. This is one place that, regardless of what denomination you're from, we know that this was so important because around the Lord's Supper, Jesus described the reason he came as God's Son. He was describing the work that he needed to do for all of humanity, both past, present, and future. He was talking to us about how we would enter into this eternal relationship with God the Father and deal with our most fundamental brokenness called sin. And at that Lord's Supper, he showed us what love is. Now, it was during the Lord's Supper, Jesus said something very important, and it's found in John 13, verse 34. And let's read that. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. You should love one another, and that will prove to the world that you are my disciples. What I want to focus you on, though, is that very first phrase. Jesus says, I'm giving you this new commandment, that you love each other as I've loved you. Now, I want you to stop and just think for a moment. For those of you who are Bible students and pride yourself in knowing the Bible, let's go back to when the Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus and say, what's the greatest commandment in the Bible? What's the greatest commandment in the Scriptures? And Jesus says there's actually two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then what did he say was the second one? Love your neighbor, what? As yourself. So as much as you love yourself, Jesus says, and this goes back to Leviticus, you can read that where that commandment's rooted in, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Now, on one hand, you can say, well, that's pretty daunting because I love myself pretty good. But that's what Jesus said. He said, that's what the Bible teaches. But then at the Lord's Supper, he flips it and he says, there's this new commandment I'm giving you. Because notice here, Jesus is not saying, love each other as much as you love yourself. He's saying, love each other as much as I have loved you. And that raises the ante considerably, doesn't it? Because to be honest with you, if I have to love you as much as I love me, well, sometimes I'm not so nice to me, so I don't always need to be nice to you. Sometimes I beat myself up, so I don't mind beating you up. Sometimes I look in the mirror and criticize myself. I don't mind then criticizing you. You see, all of a sudden Jesus flips it on its head. He says, I got a new commandment to love people, a new way of loving. And that new way of loving is that you need to love each other as much as I have loved you. You need to become people who love like me. Wow, that changes everything, doesn't it? And you know what? Jesus didn't say, here's my suggestion. Jesus didn't say, well, here's maybe a guideline that I would encourage you to consider for your life as you look at all your choices. No, he said, here's a new commandment I'm giving you, that you would love each other as much as I loved you. And that's the vision call for us as a church. Now, what does that really mean in practical terms? Can I, again, just take you to the Lord's Supper? And he did three things that helped flesh that out really quickly. Around the Lord's Supper, he first of all did this. He got out a towel and a basin, and he washed all the disciples' feet. And when I look at Jesus washing the disciples' feet, that's one way Jesus says, I want you to love each other. This is how I'm loving you. I want you to love each other. And the big word there is if you're going to love, you're going to serve. You're going to serve. So often people come to church and saying, Pastor, I really enjoyed the Journey Church, but you know what? It doesn't really have all the programs I'm looking for my children. Or, I really find that I go to a certain other church and their seats are really more comfortable. The air conditioning's better. Pastor, I would like to come here, but you don't understand. You can't meet all my needs. I got needs, and I'm coming, and I'll put a little minimal amount of money in the plate every once in a while, but I want you to understand, Pastor, that the rule here is that you got to meet my needs, Pastor, because that's why I come to church, so you will meet my needs. And Jesus is telling us that is not why you come to church. You come to church in order to serve. You come to church in order to be like Jesus himself, who came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. People, if we're going to be the church of God, if we're going to become like Jesus and love like Jesus, we got to be willing to put on the towel and put people's feet in the basin and be willing to serve, whether that's within your marriages, whether that's within your families, whether that's within your church family, whether that's within our communities. We've got to be willing to serve. There's another image that Jesus also shows us what loving like Jesus looks like, and that is he invites us all to the table. Jesus said, "Whosoever will may come." And when Jesus invites people to come to the table in order to partake of the bread and the cup, he does not have a filter, regardless of your social status, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of what neighborhood you live in, whether you live in a high-end house, whether you live in a low-end house, whether you live somewhere in between, whether you've been successful, whether you have gone through tremendous crisis and loss, regardless of what you are, whether you're mentally healthy, whether you're mentally unhealthy, whether you are good-looking, whether you don't think you're so good-looking, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're old. It doesn't matter if you're young. It doesn't matter if you're a child. It doesn't matter if you're 97 years old. It doesn't matter. Jesus says, you are invited to my table. We're the only group in the entire world that says there is no discrimination here. There's no exclusion here. You don't just come because we all have a common interest in horses or the Rotary Club or stamps or records from the 1980s. You don't come because of that. You are invited to come if you want to know Jesus. You see, we're going to love like Jesus. We're going to accept everyone, including Syrians who are going to be Muslims from that part of the world who come in among them. And we're going to reach out to them and minister to them, whether they're Christians or not, because Jesus would say, you are called to love the whole world. God so loved the whole world that he what? He gave his one and only son. There's one final image around the Lord's Supper that helps us to understand what it means to love like Jesus. There's the towel and the basin, we're called to serve. There's the table, we're called to accept. But finally, there's the bread and cup itself, which represents Jesus' broken body and Jesus poured out blood. And what that represents is simply this, that we need to forgive. We're running out of time this morning, so we're not going to play the videos, but there's a powerful video we'll share through our social media that you've got to watch. And it's this man in Rwanda who was a Hutu who had killed all these Tutsis, and he went to prison. But eventually, he started to take Alpha, and as he took Alpha, he realized that he needed to ask for forgiveness. And so he went to one young man who he had killed his grandmother and mother and children. And he said, I ask and beg for your forgiveness. And this young man was a Christian. And he said, I have no other choice but to forgive you. Christ forgave me. Who do you need to forgive today? If we're going to love like Jesus, we cannot hold anger or bitterness. And even though that's the gravity that pulls down on our soul, we have to say, if we're going to be a church that loves like Jesus, we have to forgive. We have to forgive. Jesus has given us a new pattern for love. He has given us a new commandment to love. And I know what a lot of us are saying, well, then it's impossible, Dave. It's absolutely impossible. We can't do this. It is. By ourselves, it's impossible. And that's why I want to end on this thing, and it's in your outline today, is that if you're going to experience a new pattern of love, you've got to experience the new power to love. You've got to experience that new power, and the only way you're going to do that is if you connect to Jesus. If we could go to that passage, listen to what Jesus says, remain in me, and I will remain in you, for a branch cannot produce fruit if it's severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. But listen to this part, Father, I have revealed you to them, and I will continue to do so, then your love for me will be in them, and I will be in them. Catch that last phrase. Then your love, Father, for me will be in people who love and know me. Listen, this isn't about trying to act like Jesus. This is about inviting the very person of Jesus into our souls through the person and work of the Holy Spirit. You've got to be connected to Christ. If you just think it's about doing some religious things or keeping yourself morally tight, or just going, I've got a little checklist and I'll score it with God when I'm at the end of my life, you've totally missed the point of knowing Jesus Christ. You will never be able to love like Jesus unless you're connected to Jesus. You need his power. You need his presence. You need to let that be where your bank of love overflows, because people are going to make withdrawals on you. They're going to make withdrawal. And where do you get to replenish that bank of love? It's only when you're connected to the source of love, Jesus himself. Can I invite you that if you've never known Christ in your life, open your life to him today. And for those of you who right now are saying, Dave, I'm having a hard time serving, I'm having a hard time accepting, I'm having a hard time forgiving, maybe it's time for you to say, Jesus, it's time for me to reconnect with you. Maybe it's time for me to stop doing this and say, Jesus, come back into my life in a fresh way. Can I encourage you that we're going to do the Lord's Supper? I'm going to invite Kevin Steen and Seth Kroll to come up at this moment. And they're going to lead us in the Lord's Supper. But actually, I think they're going to come down front and do it. Can I encourage you, though, that you open your life right now in this moment of communion, and when you think about coming to the Lord's Supper, you think about how Jesus showed his love to you and how he's calling you now in his new command to say, I want you now to go and love like me. This year, I want you to understand something. All those ministries we're doing, all of our ministry goals on our PowerPoint, all the neat little handouts we have, you know what the real goal of all that is? Is so that we become a church that loves like Jesus. Because when we do, I am convinced that there are so many people out in our community right now that are so hungry for that type of love. They're looking in all the wrong places. But they'll smell it off you when you really start to love like Jesus. They really will. Because they won't be hearing the anger and the cynicism and the judgmentalism and the gossip. They won't hear that. They'll start to hear self-control and peace and kindness and patience. And those things are going to start flowing from your life because you, a branch, are connected to the vine, Jesus himself. And here's the exciting thing, people. I don't know about you, but sometimes I always think to myself, gosh, I wish Jesus was around here. I wish I could know his love. And you know what I think Jesus would say to me? Dave, if you love like me and everybody else at your church loves like me, guess what? It's just like me being here right real time in the room. In fact, that's what Jesus was telling all his disciples back then, and that's what he's telling us now. If we want to experience Jesus, we got to love like him. And the only way we'll love like him is if we are connected to him. So I invite you to come to the table. I invite you to come.